In the distant year of 1973, nearly half a century ago, the small town of Watkins Glen hosted the Summer Jam, an extraordinary outdoor rock concert. The bands performing there, the Allman Brothers, Grateful Dead, and the band, attracted over 600,000 fans who traveled from all corners of the country. The warm, sunlit air buzzed with the noise of the massive, jubilant crowd. Some ran around naked, reveling in their freedom. Others waved flags emblazoned with the emblems of their favorite bands. People were singing, searching for spots to set up their tents, or sitting with friends on car rooftops, enjoying the view. Neither the sudden rain, nor the massive traffic jam stretching for miles, nor the long journey discouraged the attendees. However, among these 600,000 people, there were two who were conspicuously absent, a young couple, Bonita Bickwitt and Mitchell Weiser. The Bickwitts and the Weisers were Jewish families from Brooklyn, New York. Both families belonged to the middle class and were described as traditional, yet not very religious. 16-year-old Mitchell lived with his parents and older sister in a two-family house in the Midwood neighborhood. His father, Sidney, worked at an optical laboratory. His colleagues described him as a pleasant and kind man. Mitchell's mother, Shirley, was a homemaker at the time. Mitchell's older sister, Susan, was around 20 years old. Susan described their family as not perfect, and it was hard at times. But Mitch loved his parents, and he had plenty of friends. She portrayed Mitchell as a talented young man passionate about photography, often going out on walks because of his hobby. Mitchell developed and printed his own photos and kept a notebook where he recorded all the camera settings he used. He even worked part-time at weddings and was constantly learning something new. Bonnie's parents, Theodore and Ray, lived in a three-family house in Borough Park, a predominantly Orthodox Jewish neighborhood marked by kosher pizzerias and signs in shop windows reading Shomer Shabbos, closed on Saturdays. The streets were filled with bearded Hasidic men. However, the Bickwitts emphasized that they were not particularly religious. 15-year-old Bonnie had an older sister named Cheryl, who was around 20. Bonnie was described as a very sensitive, kind, and compassionate girl who was always surrounded by friends. The Bickwitts cherished their family and loved each other dearly. The girls described their parents as kind, generous, and affectionate. Bonnie's mother mentioned that at some point, Bonnie decided to stop eating meat, attributing it to her daughter's sensitivity and compassion. Mitchell and Bonnie attended John Dewey High School for Gifted Children in Brooklyn. For them, the school was a wonderful place where they were popular among their peers and had many friends. They met at school and quickly fell in love. According to Mitchell's best friend, the couple started dating about a year before Summer Jam. At the beginning of the summer, the couple secretly exchanged engagement rings. Although they were only 15 and 16 years old, they considered themselves husband and wife. The rings can be seen in some photos of the couple, though Mitchell wore his incorrectly, on a different finger. Ray Bickwitt recalls how the two teenagers would spend entire days together. The last year was a year of parties, she reminisced. Every weekend, someone celebrated their 16th birthday, and they always went to parties together. They were so happy together. Despite the school holidays, the couple had jobs. Mitchell worked as a photographer's assistant at Chelsea Photographers in Coney Island, New York. Bonnie also worked that summer, but not in the city. She worked as a nanny at the Wilmette Camp for Jewish children in the Catskill Mountains. She had spent many summers there and loved being in the camp. However, now that she was working there, the joy turned into frustration. She felt overburdened by her responsibilities, but stoically endured everything without complaining, even to her parents. Bonnie's parents, who wrote her letters and sometimes visited her, bringing Mitchell along to see her, only learned about her struggles after the events that unfolded in July. Mitchell was the first to become excited about attending the Summer Jam concert. Initially, he planned to go with a classmate, Larry Marion. They bought tickets and eagerly awaited the 28th of July. However, Larry's mother found out about the concert and strictly forbade him from going. Disappointed, Larry complied and gave the now useless ticket to his friend. Therefore, Mitchell decided to invite Bonnie, hoping she could get a day off from work. The new plan seemed promising, but there were complications. The camp refused to give Bonnie a few days off. Angry and frustrated, Bonnie announced that she was quitting and would return in a couple of days to collect her belongings and final paycheck. Bonnie's parents were on vacation in Cape Cod at the time, and they had no opportunity to try to dissuade her from leaving. Meanwhile, Mitchell's family was in town, and they were not thrilled about his plans. His mother, Shirley, and sister Susan made last-minute attempts to talk him out of going. Susan even stood on the steps of the house, physically trying to block her brother from leaving. Mitchell simply said that he was going anyway. Susan turned to her mother, asking her to give Mitch money so he wouldn't hitchhike. Shirley agreed and went to get some money, but at that moment, Mitch slipped past his sister and left the house. According to Susan, he left around 11:45 p.m. Buses were no longer running, so Mitch spent almost all his money on a taxi ride to Bonnie's camp. The next morning, Susan called Wilmette and was relieved to learn that Mitch had arrived safely and was having breakfast with Bonnie. He mentioned that the taxi ride had used up most of the $25 he had saved for the concert. Susan once again asked him to come home, but Mitch refused, saying he really wanted to go to the concert. Thus, on Friday, July 27th, Mitch and Bonnie had breakfast at the camp canteen, then packed their things for the trip: backpacks, sleeping bags, and a cardboard sign reading Watkins Glen to facilitate hitchhiking. People who lived through that era recall that hitchhiking was widespread at the time and not considered particularly dangerous. It is believed that the couple had around $25 between them. A camp worker gave them a ride to Narrowsburg, about 120 kilometers from Watkins Glen. Camp workers frequently traveled back and forth, transporting other workers and supplies. The driver dropped off Mitch and Bonnie and last saw them standing on the shoulder of State Route 97, trying to hitch a ride. There is some confusion about whether anyone picked up the couple afterward. There is an unverified report that they were picked up by a truck, but it might have been the same truck that brought them from the camp. The grand, massive rock concert took place, but it remains unclear whether Mitch and Bonnie ever made it to Watkins Glen. They were supposed to return by July 29th, but they didn't come home. Not in a month. Not in 50 years. When Mitchell didn't return on Sunday, July 29th, his family grew worried. On Monday, his father and sister drove to Watkins Glen to search for him themselves. Susan said they looked thoroughly and combed through the entire area, but found no sign of Mitch or Bonnie. Disheartened, they went to the Schuyler County Sheriff's Office and printed countless missing person posters. The office told them many people were still camping at Watkins Glen, and they should either look again or wait. Susan and Sydney responded that they had already searched everywhere, but their concerns were not taken seriously. Bonnie's parents, as mentioned earlier, were on vacation at the time. They had no idea that their daughter was planning to attend this concert, and certainly didn't know she was missing. Ray and Theodore realized that their daughter was gone only when they returned home to Borough Park on Tuesday. Someone from the Wilmette camp called them, looking for the girl, and explained that she had left for the weekend and hadn't come back. Bonnie's parents were horrified. According to them, the police didn't take the case seriously. They assumed the couple had simply run away and convinced the parents to wait. Both families knew this behavior was out of character for their children and remained anxious, attempting to take action on their own. To begin a search, it is essential to create a detailed report of the missing person's appearance, preferably with a photograph. This is followed by interviewing friends and relatives to gather a complete biography and psychological profile of the missing person. Then, according to the police, a regular teletype message is sent to regions and cities where friends and family believe the runaway might be. After these initial steps, 3 more levels of action typically follow. The department contacts the missing person's family to find out if there is any new information. In many cases, the missing person has already returned home by this point. However, what was at first a seemingly understandable slowness on the part of the police turned into blatant negligence. The sister of the missing girl said the police did nothing. Friends and family were not interviewed. No one in the camp, where the teenagers spent their last night before the trip, was questioned. The police didn't even enter the missing couple's details into the FBI's national database for missing persons. When the families tried to act on their own initiative, it became apparent that the various police departments were not coordinating with each other at all. That same year, from July to August, the families managed to draw media attention and get the story on TV and in newspapers. The missing children's case was also aired on the radio. It seemed that even without police involvement, there was hope for a happy reunion, but it was all in vain. There was not a single clue. The police told the parents to just wait. Perhaps the teenagers had run away to travel together for the rest of the summer, and if that were the case, they would return by September when school resumed. But the teenagers did not come back in September. In the fall of 1973, Ray, Bonnie's mother, received a letter from a Native American reservation in South Dakota requesting a donation. Since the teenagers were interested in Native American affairs, the parents wondered if their children could be there. After all, how did they find my address? Ray asked, but nothing came of it either. Although Sydney Weiser also found it very strange. The parents sent 500 letters and flyers to reservations and missionary schools across the country before concluding that their children were not in the Dakota reservation. 7 months after the couple disappeared, their friends, with support from the school administration, opened a shop called Have a Heart on Valentine's Day. They sold jewelry donated by a teacher, decorated t-shirts, and various snacks. With this effort, they raised $1,000 and gave it to a detective agency called Tracers Incorporated, which specialized in missing persons cases. Edward Goldfader, the agency's president, stated that Tracers solved more than 60% of the teenage runaway cases they took on. The Tracers apparently failed in the case of Bonnie and Mitchell, as little is known about their investigation. For many years, nothing happened. The parents continued to investigate as best they could. Around 1986, the Weiser family received a phone call at home. The operator told Sydney that someone claiming to be Bonnie wanted to speak with him. Overcome with emotion, the man eagerly agreed, but when the operator connected them, the caller hung up. Sydney later blamed himself for showing too much enthusiasm and possibly scaring the caller off, but it was likely just a cruel prank. In 1994, reporter Eric Greenberg from Newsday joined their search. He collaborated with the family for many years. Greenberg discovered that the police had not properly investigated the case. Moreover, he learned that the original case files were lost, along with the only copies of Bonnie and Mitchell's dental records. Greenberg worked with Lieutenant Anthony Suarez, who was leading the investigation at the time. The families of the missing children criticized Suarez for failing to conduct fundamental detective work, such as interviewing witnesses and questioning officers previously involved in the case. Nevertheless, Suarez promised the reporter that he would keep the case open. In 1998, Greenberg continued his investigation, now working for Jewish Week. They published an article about Bonnie and Mitchell. After the article was released, a psychic named Maurice Schickler contacted the parents, offering his services. He claimed to have seen, through his abilities, how Mitchell was killed, where exactly, and who the murderer was. Eric Greenberg met with him, after which the psychic visited Mitchell's home and spoke to Susan. Susan described the visit. "I was scared. I had a wild feeling, as if this man was the killer himself. It was like he was describing himself." Mr. Schickler told her that he had made multiple attempts to work directly with Detective Suarez, but to no avail. In 1999, the parents managed to get another television show to cover the case, showcasing the Well-Met Camp and featuring the psychic. In July 2000, Mitchell's classmates from Dewey High School organized a memorial for the missing couple on school grounds. They planted a 2.4-meter red maple tree and placed a commemorative plaque. This was a turning point. After the memorial ceremony, Susan called on the authorities to reopen the investigation. The numerous media outlets present played their part. The authorities assigned 2 high-level investigators to work on the case full-time. The new detectives began by re-interviewing all the witnesses who had been at the Well-Met Camp back in 1973, 27 years earlier. They tried to reconstruct the last day that Mitchell and Bonnie were seen before they left. The police had lost the dental records, but Susan found Mitchell's baby teeth preserved in the family's possession. Now the police had DNA again. That same month, the TV show Missing Persons featured Mitchell and Bonnie's case. The show included Susan Weiser, Ray and Cheryl Bickwit, Bonnie's mother and sister, friends of the couple, reporter Eric Greenberg, psychic Maurice Schickler, and Detective Suarez. The psychic gave a detailed description of the murder and urged people to join him in a trip to the murder site. Detective Suarez did not share his enthusiasm. As a favor to Susan, Detective Stever called the psychic Schickler to finally discuss his ideas about the investigation. Schickler was cold and dismissive. He said he was leaving town and advised the detective to call back after January 10, 2001. Susan found this very strange. Since 1998, this psychic had been complaining about the police not contacting him and dismissing all his attempts to help. Now, when a detective was finally willing to talk to him, he suddenly needed to go on a trip. This made Susan skeptical of him. In August 2001, the police received some new leads. Detective Suarez and Stever were joined by a third detective, Don Starner, who had grown up in the Watkins Glen area and lived there in the 1970s. Detective Suarez, as mentioned earlier, was from Brooklyn and had never traveled to Sullivan County to investigate cases. Detective Starner, however, planned to work alongside Detective Stever to investigate this case. That same year, both detectives traveled to Maryland to investigate a new lead from a prison. In April 2001, inmates in a Maryland prison reported hearing a confession from another inmate, a serial killer, about the murder of Mitchell and Bonnie. Both detectives went to Maryland to speak to everyone at the FBI who had worked with him. Detective Starner stated that they definitely did not consider this lead useless, despite previously describing the individual as completely insane, especially since the FBI had this killer's timeline. The FBI placed him in Poughkeepsie and New Hyde Park, New York, in 1973. To return home, Mitchell and Bonnie could have passed through these towns via the NYS Thruway or Taconic. So, the investigation into this lead continued. Detective Starner also mentioned that tracking down owners of orange Volkswagen buses from 1973 shouldn't be too difficult. He said he would attempt to do so. According to Cheryl Kagan, Bonnie's sister, the Bickwit family made a decision in 2000. After spending an enormous amount of time and energy searching for their daughter, they decided it was time to stop. Theodore passed away in 1979, only 6 years after his daughter's disappearance, clinging to the hope that she would return. Bonnie's mother, Ray, was still alive at the time of Cheryl's comment. Despite the toll of losing her younger daughter and husband, Ray was doing her best to remain positive and healthy. In 2008, Stewart created a memorial website in memory of his best friend and his beloved. Susan Liebegott, Mitchell's sister, mentioned in her notes that the investigation was halted due to the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks, as the police had more pressing matters to deal with. She still misses her brother and writes that their family and friends never felt a sense of closure. It's as if they are all still stuck in that horrible, endless day when Mitchell didn't come back. The answers that seem to be emerging after the 2000 TV show never fully materialized for them. They hope that one day they will find the truth. The Weiser family continues to search. Sometime later, another detective, Barnes, joined the reopened investigation. He stated that the inmate mentioned in 2001 did indeed confess to the murders, but when he showed everything on a map, it didn't make sense, as the locations were on the other side of the state. Barnes also noted that this inmate was not the only suspect. In 2016, excavations were carried out near Keuka Lake, but they were not officially reported. Barnes had received a tip that they might find some clue under a concrete porch at one of the houses. The owner gave permission for the work, but nothing was found. The police then had to build a new porch for the homeowner. Keuka is about 20 to 30 minutes west of Watkins and the racetrack where the festival was held. Barnes believes that the failed lead is not the end of the investigation. We ran the story on local news channels, in areas where people might know something, and I dug up something. Between 1973 and 1979, 14 children went missing here. I don't know if they are connected to the case, I can't say. In 2020, detectives searched a property in Bath, New York, after receiving another report suggesting that Mitchell and Bonnie might be found there. They didn't find anything indicating that the couple had been there. One of the most critical questions in this case is, where exactly did the teenagers disappear? Detective Barnes has a lead suggesting that they did, in fact, attend the concert. Someone sent the investigation a photograph of a girl who bears a striking resemblance to Bonnie. Stuart and Susan believe the girl in the picture might be Bonnie, but they can't be 100% sure. Susan points out that the girl has a ring that her sister didn't wear, and although the face has familiar features, the stranger's face looks slightly different. She remains uncertain. Susan continues to lead the search with Detective Barnes. They print flyers and interview people. They have a couple of leads that they are still pursuing, but there are still no physical pieces of evidence. The Weiser family has kept their old phone number since 1973 so that Mitchell can contact them, despite having moved to Arizona.